about the workings of the church. We ask that through thy grace that we may understand the history of our church and the trials and travails in which she endured over the centuries, so that we ourselves may improve our lives and live the lives as faithful Christians. Through the same Christ our Lord we pray. Amen. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Well, thank you for being here, and thank you for those who came back for a second lecture. I started out here with the Papal Emblem. We just comment on it a little because we talked about some of those symbols in the first lecture, right? Of course, the cross keys are probably the most important thing. And there's a silver key and a gold key. That's how they're depicted. I don't know if anything like that was ever mentioned in the scriptures. I didn't find any. But the gold key is the key to heaven, of course, and the silver key unlocks the sins and the other power that was given to Peter by Christ in Matthew 16 that we talked about last week. All right, there's also the the tiara, which is the triple crown. And we'll talk more about that as we go on. We have a large amount of work to cover today, so we're going to try to get through this. So I ask you that if you have questions, I'll try to answer every question, but hold them until the end. Okay. All right. Last week, just to recap. Last week we talked about the foundations of the papacy, and we talked about them being underpinned or underwritten by scriptures, the living tradition, and the writings of the early church fathers. We'll come back to that periodically to try to keep this all tied together. We also spoke about several of the earliest popes and the transition of the church from the church of the catacombs to the church that was the most favored church of the emperor. That was beginning with the Emperor Constantine. So that was a major change in the history of the church, going from that persecuted church to one that was almost officially the state church and benefiting from that. So Constantine, he was a great patron of the church. He turned over vast estates and properties to the church. He turned over property even in North Africa. North Africa, we'll see, was the breadbasket of the Roman Empire. So they had, you call them farms. They had, in other words, they became sources of revenue for the church. But he also commissioned St. Peter's Basilica, not the one that stands there today, the original one. We showed some diagrams last week. So there was one of that diagram. It said the original Cathedral of St. Peter. Then the Church of the Lateran. Hagia Sophia in Istanbul today, in Constantinople, which today is a mosque. More of a museum than a mosque. Church of Nativity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the Church of the Resurrection in Jerusalem, those churches. And also the Church of the Holy Cross in Rome and St. Paul's Basilica outside the wall were all commissioned by Constantine. He also gave them lavish gifts, silver chalices, hundreds of silver chalices, altars made of silver, especially in the Lateran Palace. The Lateran Palace had been in his family, his wife's family, and he turned that over to the church. So he was a great help to the church. And I also went on the building spree. Okay, we got that. He also saw the benefits of having a unified church that brings stability, cohesion to the empire. And he saw the benefits in this, but the church at this time, during the age of Constantine, a lot of dissension came about in this period. We're now into the 4th century, right, into the 300s. There was a lot of debates about what we call Christology, the nature of Christ. These things for sure would develop as people were trying to interpret and understand the Scripture. There was no church canon law yet. There was no doctrines that were written. The church in the first centuries was in a survival mode to spread the faith. And by the time they settled down and now they were privileged, that's when the arguments came about. So the Christology debates destabilized the church and the relationship between Constantine and the Orthodox party. The Orthodox parties are the ones who held the truth. It came in conflict with Constantine because he would favor the heretical party, who were called the Arians. Right? They were willing to work. The Arians were willing to work with the emperor and to gain his support. But the other ones the Orthodox party wanted the emperor to stay out of church affairs. That's why he favored the ones, because he tended to try to influence things. That's how it was. That's how emperors were in those days. The rules we go by today weren't even established or thought about. And by the way, as we go on today's lecture, I'm going to be given a lot of background history so that we understand the context, the historical context in which the events and the papacy were influenced by. Or else we just talk about popes and we talk about what they did, but we don't understand why they were doing certain things. So I'm going to go into a little of the background history, try to just give you a basic idea of what was going on and the tension and the stresses that they were under and the world was in during those days. The world, of course, wasn't in the New World. It was in the Old World, right? But let's just move on to Pope Sylvester. He was the 33rd Pope. And his years are up there, 314. Remember that we talked about the Edict of Milan issued by Constantine and the other emperor, his co-emperor, Licinius, giving toleration to the Christians. Actually, it was tolerations to all religions, but the emphasis was on the Christians because they were the ones who were being mostly persecuted. That happened in 313. So this pope grew up under the persecutions of Diocletian. He was the 33rd pope, though, and he was the pope under Constantine. He's the one, I'm not going to really get into this, but he's the one that they say Constantine gave the donation. How many of you have ever heard of the donation of Constantine? It's probably better you didn't, because it was a forgery. What they said was, but it was used over centuries to justify the papacy. It said that Constantine signed over the empire, the Western Empire, to the Pope, and when he moved the empire from Rome to Constantinople, right? And in the Middle Ages, they discovered, when studying the writings, that the Latin used wasn't the Latin of this era, it was the Latin of a later era. So it was proven a forgery. Anyway, it didn't make a difference because the Pope, by default, would inherit those territories, in a sense, inherited the responsibility for the people in those territories at that time. So Pope Sylvester here was our important pope. He was there during the Council of Nicaea. Now, this is a prelude to the Council of Nicaea, which Constantine actually caused because he wanted to stop the dissension. He actually called the council. The Council of Nicaea, 325, was the first ecumenical council. It was the first council in the church after the Council of Jerusalem that the apostles themselves had called. So they don't really count that because it was a meeting of the apostles. We find that in Acts. But this, they call, is the first universal, or what they call ecumenical. That means universal, where all the bishops around the world had come. About 300 attended, and they were coming out with a solution to the Arian heresy. Arius actually was at the council to defend his teaching. Now, we look harshly on the Arians because the church, that particular heresy would last over centuries, cause big problems for the church, as we'll see as we go along. But Arius himself, really, what he was trying to do was keep the unity of God. So he was saying Christ was not divine. He was created. Okay, let's just go on here. We'll see that. That'll come out because we'll talk about the heresies that plagued the church in just a moment. All right, but he was very learned and he was charismatic. He was from Alexandria in Egypt. In 324, if Constantine called the council and 300 bishops from the east showed up, Pope Sylvester did not show up. Most of the early councils were in the east and the popes did not attend. He was too sick. There's one reason or another, but there were about, I think 2 priests from him. There were about five of them from the west. And they condemned. Arius was condemned. Arianism, or the fact that Christ was created. What Arius was saying was that Christ wasn't divine, but he was created before the creation. So he had a special status. He was above the angels and above men, of course, but he wasn't divine. We're going to see why that's wrong and why that's such an important issue. Right? I just picked this up off the line. It says, well, I think Jesus isn't really God. That's supposed to be Arius. By the way, he was not a bishop, so that was wrong to put that on him. But Sylvester was not present, so he wasn't part of drafting the Nicene Creed. The Nicene Creed that we say at Mass each and every day is the creed that was written to defend the Christological, the Orthodox Christological doctrine of Christ as being true God, true man, right? 2 natures, 1 person. Right, so the Pope wasn't part of that. That's unfortunate, but they did a good job. Arius was condemned. St. Athanasius was the one, as Arius was defending himself, the one who took the role of like the prosecutor was St. Athanasius, who was the patriarch in Alexandria, the same place that Arius was from. So they were enemies. But we'll see that the supporters of Arianism would continue, and it would continue to grow and expand, even after the council had condemned it, right? Because they believed in the unity of God. The famous church historian, Eusebius, if you read about church history, he's quoted so often. He was, for a time, an Arian himself, and he's the one who baptized Constantine, tradition says, so Constantine was baptized by an Arian. Okay. The Arians also made inroads into the Barbarian Tribes. That would plague the West because the heresy was mostly throughout the eastern part of the empire, not in the West except for the Barbarian Tribes. We'll see that a little bit later. Okay. Athanasius himself, because of over the years that followed, was exiled 5 times because some of the successors to Constantine's became Arian. So we had some of the emperors were Arians. They would persecute the church. A lot of battles, big problems with this heresy. Okay. So, by the way, these were the main Christological arguments in those days. And I think they're worth mentioning, but I won't spend a lot of time on them because that's off the popes here. Arianism, right, was condemned at the Council of Nicaea in 325. Nestorianism is an interesting one. That was named after Nestor, who was the patriarch of Constantinople. We'll see that some of the patriarchs in Constantinople in this apostolic see were heretical. This, and we're going to talk about another one. And he taught that in Christ the 2 natures are separate, divine and this. And that caused even a deeper problem because then he declared that Mary is not the mother of God. Mary is the mother of Christ, the human. And this debate caused riots because if you know about the icons that they use, that they prefer in the Greek church, but we honor them, we venerate them also. The icon of Mary is called the Theotokos, which means, right, the mother of God. And he said, you can no longer call it the Theotokos, you have to call it the Christotokos, the mother of Christ. It caused a lot of problems, riots happened, and the Council of Ephesus in 431 and Chalcedon settled that. Okay, they zeroed that out and said, no, Mary is the Theotokos, and this is a heresy. And then the last one is Monophysitism. This is one that came also out of Egypt, Alexandria, and this says mono. You see the word mono means one. Christ had 1 nature, Physitism means the nature. One nature, he's all divine, and he only appeared to be a human, and therefore he didn't die and suffer on the cross. He was a spirit. That was condemned also by several councils, the Third Council of Ephesus also. We'll come back to this as we go along, all right? All right, so let's go and look at Pope Innocent. Pope Innocent I, the 40th Pope. Pope Innocent was the first, Pope Innocent, okay, no, he's not. I was going to say the first great. We're going to talk about two popes that are the greats, but we haven't reached them yet. Innocent, we're going to talk about him because he was pope during a really important time, and that was in the year 410. In the year 410, the leader of a Gothic tribe called the Visigoths, Alaric, he sacked Rome. It was very significant. It had a great emotional impact on the empire at wide. They killed, they raped a lot of Romans, they pillaged the city. It was the first attack like this in 800 years. You can imagine, right? It was such an emotional and psychological shock as it was a material loss. Okay, there's some of the images of the brutality. As a matter of fact, this prompted, I'll come back to that. All right. This prompted St. Augustine to write that work, the City of God. And are you familiar with the City of God? Okay. It was because of this, because there were still a lot of pagans in the Roman Empire, and they said it's the Christians' fault because the pagan gods protected Rome for 800 years. But now that you turn to Christ, Christ couldn't protect the empire. So Augustine sat down and he taught them Roman history, and he showed them otherwise. That was part of the book, setting the history straight, okay, because Rome had been attacked. Well, I don't want to get the City of God right now, but it prompted that work, which was a significant work. Also, he talked about the future of the church, and it was in the City of God that pretty much medieval Christianity followed that template of Christianity that Augustine had wrote as a result of this. Now, this is background and context history here. Anyone know what those blue lines are? Anybody want to? The blue lines. Okay. Well, they're rivers. Okay, right?
Yeah, they're the two rivers that the Roman Empire's borders.
Right. Do you know what they are?
The names of the rivers?
Which one? Do you know what the rivers are?
They're where the Empire
Okay.
made their borders.
Right. The Rhine and the Danube. These are the natural borders of the Roman Empire. They were formidable. They are formidable rivers today. This is the Rhine, and this is the Danube. These are the Alps. The source is the Alps. Right. The Rhine flows northwest and empties out into the North Sea, part of the Atlantic, and the Danube flows southeast and empties out into the Black Sea. Goes all through Eastern Europe. Why we say that is because this is the area that the barbarians came from. Here we have the steppes of Russia getting into Ukraine and Hungary, and down here Romania and those countries, Bulgaria, etc. This area where the Germanic tribes were, they were pressing on the Roman Empire for centuries. But in the early days of the Empire of the Romans, with these formidable rivers here, had some of their best troops along the border. But they couldn't, if they attacked the empire, they couldn't establish what they call a beachhead, right? So the empire was very secure. But over the years, during the Christian era, many of the tribes worked alliances with the Romans, and the Romans allowed some of the tribes to come over the border and settle on the border, and then they were responsible to defend that part of the border. And for a century or two, it worked well, but it started to deteriorating. More of the barbarians kept pouring over the border. Okay, so this is just another look at Rome, because in 333, that's already had taken place, Constantine moved the empire, the capital, from Rome to Constantinople. That's on this peninsula, the Sea of Marmara and this is the Black Sea, and this is a very easy place to defend. We'll have a look at it. But we can see the empire. This is North Africa, and down into Egypt, and then this is the Levant, or the Holy Land, as we call it, and modern-day Turkey, Asia Minor. Okay. This is Constantinople, and it was very well defended. There's a moat and 3 walls here. The Sea of Mama has a very swift current, so these ancient ships couldn't anchor to bring troops in. And over here in the Golden Horn is, this just indicates a cable. It was a cable that they would winch up when ships were coming in, just a few feet below the water. And when their ships come in, they just winched it down, and it just dropped to the bottom of the sea. So it would last another 1,000 years. And they always consider themselves Romans. In hindsight, we call them Byzantines, or the Byzantine Empire, which to the contemporaries, they were the Roman Empire. It would last there another 1,000 years till 1453. And we're in the 400s now. That was 1,000 years more. Okay. These are the 3 walls. The moat, they were about 50 feet high, 50 feet thick, and there's 3 walls. So that was worked very well for them, whereas Rome was at the mercy of all these barbarian tribes. Okay, that's what the barbarian tribes, that's about. Each color was a different one, right? We don't have to know these, but we see the Vandals came all the way down. They were taking over here when St. Augustine was on his deathbed, took over this part. Now here's the problem with these tribes. Most of them, by this time, had converted to Christianity, but most of them were Arians, so they weren't friendly to the church. All right. Okay, the only ones that became Catholics from the beginning, and it was very impactful, and we have a lot to thank in history for them, were the Franks. Okay, the Franks then would split between East and West and make up the basis of the German people and the French people, mixed in with other tribes. All right. Okay, so we see Rome. That was another attack on Rome right here. So we saw already the attack of 410. Let's see what else we got. So, but just to give a review of that history, so when the emperor did move to Constantinople, he took most of the army. They left some armies behind, but the best armies went with the emperor. The bureaucracy went, and the Roman infrastructure left Rome. So the West was pretty much left on its own. By 400 AD, there was only one institution left behind in the West. It was well established. It had organizational leadership. It had facilities. I know I'm talking about the church, right? Okay. It was to this institution that the people turned for their needs. What we're saying is that by default, the church and the Pope, as the head of the church, by default became the civil leaders. In other words, they had to take on civil responsibilities. It was just by default. So now we turn to Pope Leo the Great. He's the first pope to be called Great. And we're going to talk about another pope after him. There's only 2 popes who are classified as Great, but we'll probably talk about this in the last lecture. Of course, there's a movement to call John Paul II the Great, and it's gaining some momentum, so he would be the 3rd pope. So here we have the first pope. He's quite a man here. Let's look at some of the things he did. Okay, he was born in Rome about 400 AD, so he was about 10 years old when Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. He was the son of an aristocratic family, a senator, and he grew up, and the family had that tradition of public service, which most of the Roman aristocrats had. They worked somewhere in the administration of the empire, and had responsibilities. Okay. He also served as a diplomat for the emperor. That's the emperor in Constantinople. He was a diplomat for him in Gaul, which is France today. That was the Emperor Valentinian. At the age of 30, however, he felt the need to reform on his father's death, so he became a cleric. Okay. So he was a brilliant ecclesiastical administrator because he was trained in that area. and he was a diplomat. He was a great preacher, and he was a developer. He was a great theologian, but he also developed this theology saying that Rome was meant to be, by God, in other words, the center of the church, because he said it was part of his plan for salvation. Right? He made Rome great so Romans could travel on the Rome. You probably heard about the Pax Romana, and the 200 years of peace by this time was over now, where the peace of the empire made it advantageous, right, for the Christians. They weren't in the middle of wars, and they could travel around the empire, and that's how the faith was able to spread so quickly to the ends of the earth, as they say. Okay, so the ancient city, he said, was founded by the twins of the Roman tradition, Romulus and Remus, right? And so it was reborn by the twin apostles, Peter and Paul, by the martyrdom of their blood. Okay. He was a prolific writer. Right? He wrote to churches in Spain, Africa, Balkans, and Greece, and other churches. He was writing in response to the bishops from these different churches would write to him. They recognized the primacy of Rome. So they were writing him saying, well, how do I handle this situation? How do I handle that? And he would write back in depth and in detail on just how certain situations should be handled. And then he would tell them, make copies of this letter, circulate it. Okay? So he was establishing his authority. And these letters would later develop into what they called decretals. Decretals would be part of Canon Law, right, mostly coming down from the popes or from the councils. In other words, the Canon Law, a canon is an excerpt from the law, for example, a particular law. And it started with what they call decretals. There's volumes and volumes of these decretals. They started as letters from the popes, and Leo was probably one of the most important ones. Okay, he started making appointments. Prior to this, usually the priest would elect their own bishops, but he started making appointments of bishops and all, having some control over that. That would go back and forth. We'll talk about lay investiture also a little later. Okay, so he organized the Western Church along the Roman bureaucratic system. If you hear about the offices in the church in the Vatican, and you talk about even the law of the church, canon law we call it, is all based on Roman law, how they set it up, right? The Juris Justinian. Justinian would come along and codify all the Roman law, and the church followed those codes of laws. And it also forms the basis of most of the law in West. That's why they say a lot of lawyers, they used to study Latin in the old days. Okay. All right. Okay, so his goal was to unify and organize the church under papal leadership to protect the truth of the Christian creed. Right. In 440, Eutyches. Now, Eutyches was just a presbyter, is how they listed, which is a priest. That's where the word priest comes from presbyter. He was a theologian. He was from Constantinople. Now, he was really in this debate against Nestorianism, that Christ had two. His nature, his divine nature, and his human nature were separate. So Christ, man, and remember Mary's just the mother of Christ, and that sort of thing. Well, he was cited for being one of the heroes in attacking Nestor, right, which was his bishop. That's why he was from the same city. But he taught that the two natures of Christ, this was his explanation, were fused into a new nature. See, and that didn't sit well. And so the riots broke out. The people respond to these things. And the Patriarch of Constantinople, Flavian now, he called on Leo. Now this is an incredible example of the Patriarch of Constantinople, which is today the Orthodox Church, calling on the Pope in Rome, to the Bishop of Rome, or the Patriarch in Rome, to settle this debate. So an early example, right, of the Orthodox Church appealing to Rome to resolve a problem. Okay. By the way, here's how that came out. The human nature, divine nature, and a new nature. And this nature, he said, is below divine. They had this problem in Christology. because believe it or not, what I said earlier, they didn't understand the principle. They didn't understand the Trinitarian God, which is well defined to us today. They thought they were trying to preserve the unity of God. The Unitarian God is what the Jews and Muslims believe in. We believe in a Trinitarian God. One God in three persons, right? But there's still always one God. Okay. So anyway, the Emperor Marcion, he called another council at Chalcedon. That's near Constantinople, and 500 bishops came. It was the largest council, largest gathering up to this time. But Leo didn't attend. But he sent some representatives, and he sent them with what's called a tome. That's what we call a tome. Is from the Greek word which means book. It wasn't a book he sent them, it was his writings he sent, because he wrote on the problem. Remember I said that he was a great thinker, a great theologian. And his tome was read and approved by as a matter of fact, they commented, they said, this is so clear how Leo can explain the nature of Christ. And we'll look at some of those points right now in a minute. But anyways, Eutyches was condemned, and the decision was Christ had a single divine, and those who taught that Christ only had a single and divine nature, right? Or who imagined a mixture or confusion between the natures of Christ. That was all condemned by these early councils. Okay, now here's Leo's tome. These are the bullet points on his tome. Let's take a minute because it's important that it gets back to those other early heresies. Right? He said Jesus is a single person. Right? He's God. Single person, he's God. Jesus has two natures. Salvation depends on Jesus' human and divine nature. This is extremely important. Right? It was the human beings sinned against God. It's up to humans to find make amends with God, to find expiation, because they're the sinners. But humans don't rise to the level of God. God is infinite, right? Oh, it has to be a divine person, but it can't be a divine person alone, and there's no divine person because we only have one God. Of course, God had the solution. He gave his only Son, right, who is divine, and took a human nature. We call it the Incarnation. This is the importance of the Incarnation. It is God becoming flesh. As flesh, he's full human, he's fully God. And he's the only one who can effect expiation. Okay. All right. So that's why he had to be human and divine. And here we go, a millennium and 1,600 years ago, and Leo knew that immediately. Human and divine interchange, all right. And it must distinctive natures, a unity of person. Right? So the nation, they have to be distinct. They're not separate, though. They're united into the one person of Christ, who's God, the second person of the Trinity. There you have a definition, so to speak, or it clarifies the Trinity to a certain extent, but mostly the nature of Christ. Has to be divine, has to be human. So that was what Leo's tome was all about. Now, in order to please the emperor, the council, what they did was they recognized the special dignity of the See of Constantinople as the new capital, the new Rome. And this was another one of the sore spots between the Eastern Church and the Western Church, because this infuriated Leo. Right? Leo made it clear that Rome's exalted status, now I underline this, had nothing to do with the city of Rome as the capital of the Roman Empire. Right? Its elevated status or exalted status is derived from Peter and Paul's dual apostolicity, which we talked about last week. Remember? The primacy of the See of Rome, the primacy of Peter. It's not from the political basis. Now this is important. We also said last week that the church fathers also wrote about this. So we're going to go back and look at Irenaeus of Lyons. We talked about him. He was the protege or disciple of Polycarp, and Polycarp himself was a disciple or protege of the Apostle John. You can't get much closer to the apostles, right, in the next century. He wrote this in his famous work that we mentioned last week, Against Heresies, about 180 A.D., right? He put the tradition, now let's listen to these words carefully, the tradition derived from the apostles of the very great, the very ancient, and universally known church founded and organized at Rome by the two most glorious apostles, Peter and Paul, also by pointing out, right, the faith preached to men, which comes down to our time by means of succession of bishops. We talked about apostolic succession last week and the laying of hands, and I mentioned those hands have come down from the apostles to Father Michael and Father Tom and Father Raj and to our deacons right to this very day in an unbroken chain. All right, and it means here, for it is a matter of necessity that every church should agree with this church on account of its underlying preeminent authority, exalted status. As Leo is writing exalted status, right? He agrees. Leo is writing, and Irenaeus corroborates it, or I should say Leo is actually corroborating Irenaeus about the status of Rome. Okay, now let's go on. All right, the Roman legions now, and the infrastructure of Rome, or the rest, they continued to deteriorate. In 552, Pope Leo I the Great, he led an emissary to northern Italy, to a place called Mantua, to talk Attila the Hun. I'm sure you've heard of Attila the Hun, who was coming down now with his sights on Rome to plunder and to destroy that city. He, by the way, was... let's take a look at him. Leo was successful in turning Attila back. There's a lot of tradition. Some said the Apostle Peter appeared there. Some said he brought a lot of money with him, and there's a good chance he did bring some, try to bribe him off, because that was common in those days. But historians today really suspect that his army was just kind of exhausted. We look here today, we see the territory of Attila the Hun, and this is all going back to the steppes of Russia. I believe that's probably the Volga River about there. And he had actually went up the Danube and crossed the Rhine here and had defeated a Roman army here. And then he came back to his base and was northern Italy, and this is where he was met by Pope Leo in Mantua, and he stopped. They think maybe he was just out of wind, out of supplies, out of logistics and that sort of thing. But anyway, he went back and he would die after that, so his empire broke up. But we can see how the empire was falling apart, and the Pope is still standing in Rome alone. But Leo did a lot of these great things, and that's why they would call him great. Here's an image on that, Pope Leo. This is Attila the Hun, and this, of course, is to be Peter. He got that sword in his hand that he I think, lobbed off Malchus's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane. That's probably the sword he had used. Okay. So, 3 years later, Leo was at it again, right? We're not finished with Leo. In 355, 3 years after he stopped Attila the Hun, there was now a Vandal coming out of North Africa on the way to attack Rome. All right, they threatened to destroy Rome, and Leo really couldn't convince him. He tried to convince him not to destroy the city, and he appealed to him not to mercilessly slaughter the people, but it was still another slaughter, another attack on Rome. All right, that was 455. It would only be 20 years later that the Roman Empire in the West officially collapsed, and that was here when another Gothic king by A.R.C. He defeated this Roman general called Romulus Augustus. Unlike the other barbarians, you see, they always had a relationship with the Roman Empire. They've been dealing with the Romans. They had been fighting for the Romans at certain times against other tribes. They had all this interrelated relationships. But A.R.C. was the first barbarian who defeated this Roman army, and he refused to rule in the name of Rome. That's what they used to do to the other barbarians. You defeated us, take this territory and rule in our name. He said no. He took the symbols of authority of Rome and sent it back to Byzantium. we have the the barbarians moving down into the Italian peninsula into a Gothic empire for a short time. All right, we're going to turn now Gregory the First. He's the second pope to be called great. He's now the 64th pope, so you can see it's not one pope following the other. We're skipping over a lot of popes, trying to talk about the important ones. All right, but this is Gregory the First, Gregory the Great. Just like Leo the First was Leo the Great, that's one way you can remember it, because I think there would be 16 Gregories, 16 popes that took the name Gregory, and we're going to talk about another one today. Okay, I have to keep moving on here. So Gregory was also born in a wealthy patrician family in Rome, just like Leo, and his father actually served in the Senate and was a prefect of Rome. That's something similar to a mayor, let's say. He was running the city. He's famous for instigating the first mission, a large mission. He sent, it was called the Gregorian Mission, named after him, and it was, he sent St. Augustine of Canterbury to England, to the British Isles, to convert the British. That's where it started. That's how the British first come into the church, the pagan Anglo-Saxons in England, to Christianity. He was also known for his writings, and he was the most prolific, so he outwrote Leo in writings and letters and that sort of thing. He also aligned the Spain and France to the church. What that means, Spain and France were under Visigoths, Ostrogoths, etc. For a time, and he was able to bring them back to the church, right, from Arianism into the church. The Franks, of course, and the Lombards were also Arians. We're going to talk about the Lombards now, and the Visigoths aligned with Rome in religion. In other words, he brought them into the church. This is what the map of Europe looked like pretty much. The Ostrogoth kingdom here, most of Italy, Franks up here, Burgundians, they would all be merged. And this is the Latin word Lungobardo. It means Lombards. They're rising up now. We're going to see them. See, Visigoths here, Vandals, had finally taken over North Africa. And the popes are still in the middle of this. So Gregory the Great is also known as the father of Christian worship because of his exceptional reforms of the liturgy, the church worship. Some of his reforms were that we know about, were that he revised the liturgy of what they call the pre-Tridentine Mass. Tridentine refers to the Council of Trent. That was in the 16th century. If you grew up like I did in the 1950s, as a few of us did probably, you belonged to the Tridentine Church. It was the Latin Church where the priest had his back to the Mass. Everything was in Latin. The people didn't participate like they do today, right? It was Vatican II. So that was, this is the Tridentine Mass that Leo made. But also in a letter, he explained that he took the Paternos there, right, the Our Father, and he's the one who moved it immediately to after the canon, the Roman canon. The canon of the Mass today is the Eucharistic Prayer, right? And immediately before the fraction. The fraction is when the priest is breaking the host. That signifies breaking, Christ is breaking the bread, right? So, in other words, he's the one who put the Paternos there, the Our Father, where it is today. It remained in the same place in the Mass and in the liturgy. Okay. Now, let's talk about Pope Pelagius here for a moment. This is just a short one. He was the one who chose Gregory as an ambassador to the imperial court in Constantinople. So before Gregory was actually a pope, he was ambassador to the court at Constantinople. That proved to be important for him because while he was there, Pope Pelagius asked Gregory as an ambassador to ask the emperor to send military aid for the Lombards. Of course, as usual, same story. They couldn't. They were fighting the Persians in the east. They never got help from Byzantium, and that's why I say that they were left alone. So in Constantinople, while he was there, this is before he's pope, he took issue with the patriarch. Now this is a different patriarch, and his name is Eutychius, not to be confused with Eutyches, who we just spoke about, the one who said the natures of Christ emerged, right? He was a priest. This one is the patriarch. He's the second patriarch to come out with a heresy, right? He said, he came out with a book and said that the resurrection, Christ rose, in other words, from the dead. He was a spirit. He didn't have a real body. And the Roman ambassador there, that is Gregory, like I say, before he was Pope, said, you're wrong, Your Excellency. He said, and he quotes Luke 24:39. Does that sound familiar to you? Today's gospel. 1,500 years ago, right? 1,550 years ago, right? Pope Gregory, before he was Pope, is quoting today's gospel. It shows that continuity of church and of belief, of doctrine that comes down. And I have it right here from today's. By the way, I didn't know this. I didn't plan this. I set this up. When I did my research on Gregory, it gave me this. I said I had looked up that gospel. I didn't know. When you say Luke 24, I don't know immediately what it is. I have to look it up like anyone else. And then when I came to Mass this morning, I said, my gosh, it's today's gospel. I don't believe it, right? What did Christ say? Right. All right. This is after the resurrection. So Christ appears to the apostles, peace be with you, he says. But they were startled, etc. And he says, why are you troubled? And why questions arise in your hearts? He said, look at my hands and look at my feet, that I myself touch me and see. Because, he says, ghost does not have flesh and bones. And you can see that I have. And then he asks, could I have something to eat? They give him a baked fish, right? In today's gospel. There it is. Leo, 1,550 years ago, is quoting it. So he still couldn't convince the archbishop, so they went to the emperor, and the emperor ruled in favor of Gregory and said, burn Eutyches' book, or whatever it is, books. All right. Oh. Now, Gregory had strong convictions on missions, we saw. He's credited with not only sending missionaries to England, but up in northern Europe. He's also, for the Gregorian Mission. Well, we mentioned that before, so let's go on. Also, Gregorian chant is attributed to him, right? And Western Plain chant, it was, of course, reformed in the late 9th century, but it's attributed to Pope Gregory I, the great Gregorian chant. Okay, that's the credo there, and there's your Gregorian chant. Very simple to follow. No fancy marks, just follow it along. All right. Yeah, that's the Nicene Creed right there. All right, so he organized the Papal Estates, not the Papal States yet, with over 1,000 square miles, so that the poor of the city could be fed. Right? And it says his own version of Meals on Wheels, because he was sending food out daily to people who were sick and incapacitated. Okay. He used papal funds to defend Rome, and he bribed the Lombards twice. So it was common. In fact, that's what the empire, when they went to the emperor, he usually said, bribe them. And of course, the church lowered a lot of the gifts that came from Constantine there. Okay, and that was, he stopped them twice from sieging the city. All right, now, let's look at the Lombards. You see, by this time, the 700s, the Lombards have all of this northern Italy, and they're going down. The Byzantines had some territory in the south. The Franks are up and coming here. By the way, this here is Muslim Spain by 711. And this is an incursion that the Muslims made into France. And if it wasn't for Charles Martel, a Frank, Charles Martel, 753, brought his army down of Franks and defeated the Muslims right here. And that was their furthest advanced into Europe. Remember, they would rule a good part of Spain for almost 700 years. But they were stopped by Charles Martel. Martel, by the way, is the French word for hammer. They called him the hammer. Right? And that was 740. And it's important because the king of the Franks and the Lombards was 700, started coming down, and the Pope, who kept appealing to Constantinople and was told to bribe them, couldn't hold out any longer. So some politics was in the work here. In 751, the Lombards conquered what was left of the Byzantine presence in northern Italy. The Duchy of Rome was completely cut off from the empire, of which it was theoretically still a part. And there was Pope Pope Zachary, the 91st Pope, who crowned Pepin. Now, who is Pepin the Younger, the king of the Franks? Well, here's how this story goes. The Franks were led by a dynasty called the Merovingians. But what they call a major domo was Charles Martel. And he, named after him, because he founded a new dynasty, and Charles, the word for Charles in Latin is Carolus. So it became the Carolingian dynasty. Charles Martel was the father of Pepin. Pepin was the father of Charlemagne. So the Lombards, Zachary now crowns Pepin, the son of Charles Martel the Younger, the king of the Franks. He passed over the Merovingians. With that move, the Carolingians supplanted the Merovingians as the king of the Franks. This has a great impact on the history here, because Pepin would come down into Italy 2 times, maybe 3 or 4, and defeated the Lombards. And we'll see that he took control of northern Italy, and he gave that territory to the church. It's called a donation of Pepin, and this is not a forgery. And that donation of Pepin became the Papal States. Okay, so the Lombards are here. These are the Papal States. This, most of it, Byzantine, especially in these dark places. Sicily was now in 800s would be taken over by the Muslims. Okay. In 781, Charlemagne, Papal son, united the regions over which the Pope would rule, because he came down about 4, maybe 5 times to put down the Lombards that kept rising up every time Charlemagne left. The cooperation between the papacy and the Carolingian dynasty prompted Pope Leo III, to crown Charlemagne a Holy Roman Emperor. This changes the dynamics in Europe. No longer are they looking to the Byzantines. No longer did the Byzantine Empire have control of Rome in that part. So they made an emperor. They have now an emperor that they can turn to. And then, of course, these emperors would start influencing and try and exert control over the papacy. All right, there's the picture of the coronation of Charlemagne. That happened in the Lateran Palace, right? Okay. Now, I'm not sure we're going to be able to have time to finish with Gregory VII. Gregory VII is an extremely important pope. Then we'll just go on for a little bit. Now I can pick up next week on this too. We can try to do some on him. All right, he was responsible for Gregorian reform. What does that have to deal with? Mostly the investiture controversy and his battle with a long descendant after Charlemagne, we're about 200 years later, Henry IV. Okay, so the first half of the 11th century were dark days for the church, because the papacy was the pawn of Roman families. They were deciding who was going to be the pope. And also, things were changing for Pope Leo IX. He was the 157th pope. He himself was elected as a reformer, and he handpicked a monk by the name of Hildebrand to come to Rome to be his counselor. That Hildebrand would become Gregory the 7th, but that would be about 4 or 5 popes after Leo. But this is what the 3 evils that were plaguing the church. Simony, the buying and selling of sacred offices and other things. The unlawful marriage of the clergy, right, which was getting extremely out of hand. And lay investiture, where kings and nobles were controlling the families. To all of these, Hildebrand directed his reformers' attention. And we would see he'd be the first pope to depose an emperor. Now, I don't want to rush through it. There's just so much to cover in the papacy. It's just hard to pick out what's important and get it into this time. So I'm going to stop here. And I'll pick up, we'll cover this, and I'm going to open for questions. Okay, yes.
What's the name of the document you said, the forgery?
That's the donation of Constantine.
And
If you Google that, you'll get the whole story on it, right? Okay.
another question. And the Roman Empire is, the Pope, Charlemagne to 800 Roman Empire. It's a Holy Roman Empire. Give him as a Holy Roman Empire emperor. But as long as now it was 963 Otto first, it became a Holy Roman Empire. At the time it was a Roman Empire, just.
Yeah, well, the Roman Empire had moved to Constantinople. So there was, they said they still own that territory, but it was de facto, it didn't exist, you know. Let me just give someone else a question. Yes?
Have you covered the Gregory, who's famous for the calendar?
Wait, which one?
The Gregory calendar?
Oh, that was Gregory, I think, the 12th.
That's later.
Yeah, I think it's the 12th. It wasn't the 1st and it wasn't the 7th. I had to check that because that question came up in my mind when I was preparing the lecture. I said, what about the Gregorian calendar?